She poured his coffee every morning, never knowing she was serving a billionaire in disguise. Then one rainy morning, his son walked in, flanked by 4 bodyguards, grief in his eyes, and a voice that made the diner go silent. "What did my father tell you before he died? What do you think he left behind for her?" Comment your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that'll leave you speechless. What if the one person you showed kindness to, the one you thought had nothing left to offer, was quietly watching, testing what humanity meant to you? For Mia Ramos, a 29-year-old black waitress juggling 2 kids, overdue rent, and fading hope, kindness was the only thing she could still afford. Every morning, it cost her nothing, just a warm smile, a hot cup of coffee, and a few gentle words to an old man most customers didn't notice. His name was Hector Brooks, a soft-spoken gentleman who shuffled into the Sunrise Diner at exactly 8:15 a.m., rain or shine, and always took the corner booth by the window. He never changed his order: black coffee, 2 sugars, buttered toast, and silence. He'd remove his tan coat carefully, place a worn notebook beside his plate, and greet her with a simple, "Morning, Mia." To everyone else, he was just another elderly regular. To Mia, he was different. He looked at her like she mattered. When she asked about his day, he'd grin and say, "Better now that you're here." The diner itself was a tired patch of survival: cracked linoleum floors, a flickering neon sign buzzing like an old memory, and the smell of burnt bacon woven into every corner. To Mia, it was both her cage and her comfort zone. For 5 long years she had lived in that rhythm: the hiss of the coffee machine, the scrape of plates, the desperate laughter of people just trying to get by. She'd learned to pour warmth into every cup she served, even when her own life was running cold. No one knew much about Hector. Some said he'd been a schoolteacher. Others whispered he'd once been rich. But Mia never asked. He wasn't her problem or her project, just her daily reminder that kindness didn't have to cost anything. Sometimes he'd write quietly in that gold-tipped notebook, and when she teased him, he'd say, "Just trying to finish something before time finishes me." She laughed every time, until the morning he didn't come. The coffee was poured, the booth was ready, but the door never opened. 8:15 passed. 8:30, 9 o'clock. The hum of the diner swallowed the silence he left behind. Mia caught herself glancing at the door every few minutes, telling herself maybe he was just late, maybe the rain slowed him down. But deep inside, she felt something was wrong. The old man's absence weighed heavier than the empty tip jar. 3 days later, that feeling was confirmed. It was a Tuesday morning when the diner door swung open, and the sound wasn't the usual metallic jingle, it was the echo of polished shoes and power. 4 men in black suits walked in, scanning the room like it belonged to them. The chatter stopped. The sizzle on the grill seemed to hush. And between them walked a man in an expensive navy suit, his expression hard enough to silence the city itself. He looked straight at Mia. "Are you the one who served my father breakfast every morning?" The pot of coffee slipped slightly in her hand. I guess so." "Why?" The man's gaze didn't soften. "My name is Tony Brooks. My father, Hector Brooks, passed away 2 nights ago." The world froze around her. The hum of the diner faded. She felt her chest tighten, shock, grief, confusion colliding into one hollow ache. But before she could speak, Tony added, "He left something for you. And he told me that if I ever wanted to understand the kind of man he was, I should start here." Every pair of eyes in the diner turned toward her, the broke single mom, the nobody waitress, standing face to face with a billionaire's son and his 4 silent bodyguards. The same booth that once held an old man's quiet peace now held a secret that was about to turn her world upside down. She thought she was just serving breakfast. But the man she served had been preparing her for a truth worth far more than money. For the next few weeks, nothing about the mornings at Sunrise Diner changed, at least not from the outside. The neon sign still flickered like a tired heartbeat above the window. The smell of bacon still clung to the air like a second skin. The jukebox still hummed softly with old Motown tracks no one paid attention to anymore. But something inside that diner had shifted. It began with conversation, or rather, the slow, hesitant shape of one. Mia didn't even remember how it started exactly. Maybe it was the day she mentioned that her youngest, Caleb, had lost a tooth and left it under his pillow. Hector had chuckled, a small, surprised sound that made her look up in disbelief. "What?" she asked. He smiled faintly, eyes glimmering behind his glasses. "My son once did that. Except he wrote a letter demanding interest if the tooth fairy was late." Mia laughed out loud, the sound catching the attention of two customers at the counter. "Smart kid," she said. "Sounds like he turned out rich." "Maybe too rich," Hector murmured, and then his gaze fell to his cup of coffee. It was the first time he'd ever mentioned family. Mia didn't push. She just smiled, refilled his cup, and said softly, "Caleb asked for chocolate coins. I told him the fairy doesn't do bribes." That earned her another chuckle, low, real, almost boyish. It was the first time she saw him look alive. After that day, their conversations unfolded slowly, like sunrise creeping over a skyline. Each morning revealed a new piece of who they were, not through confession, but through comfort. He would ask, "How's Caleb? Still bargaining with magical creatures, or your oldest, Jasmine, still painting on the walls?" Mia would laugh, leaning against the counter. "She's an artist in progress. Or a vandal in training, depending on who you ask." "Don't stop her," Hector would reply. "Every masterpiece begins as a mess." She never forgot that line. One Thursday morning, the clouds rolled in thick and gray, pressing low over the city like a secret. By the time Hector arrived, the rain had started, soft at first, then relentless. The diner was nearly empty, the windows streaked with water, and thunder grumbled far away. "Rough morning, huh?" Mia said, handing him a napkin as he shook the rain from his coat. He smiled. "I've seen worse storms. This one's just noisy." They sat in the comfortable silence that had become their ritual, the clinking of his spoon, the low murmur of the coffee machine. But as the rain refused to stop, customers trickled away until it was just the two of them and the hum of rain on glass. "Guess you're stuck with me a while longer," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. "Worst fate imaginable," he replied dryly, though his eyes sparkled. She laughed. "Oh, come on. I'm great company. Ask anyone." He lifted a brow. "Does the coffee machine count as anyone?" Mia pretended to be offended, gasping dramatically. "You wound me, Mr. Brooks." He chuckled, and the sound, deep and warm, filled the diner like sunlight. That afternoon, for the first time, Hector didn't just eat and write. He stayed. They shared a slice of apple pie that Mia insisted was on the house, though she secretly paid for it out of her tips. The rain tapped against the window in rhythm with their laughter, the kind of laughter that made the diner feel new again, as if time had stopped outside its glass walls. "Do you ever draw, Mia?" Hector asked suddenly, his tone curious. She blinked. "Not since Jasmine was a baby. I used to love sketching, though. Wanted to be an illustrator once." "Why'd you stop?" She hesitated. "Bills. Life. Time." She shrugged, her smile faltering. "Dreams are expensive, Mr. Brooks. Art doesn't pay the rent." He studied her quietly, then said, "Maybe not. But it keeps you alive long enough to find what does." The words lingered. Long after he left that day, long after she mopped the floors and locked the doors, Mia sat at the counter replaying them in her head. The next morning, disaster struck before dawn. The old industrial coffee machine, the heart of the diner, sputtered, groaned, and died. Mia banged the side of it gently, whispering desperate prayers. "Come on, not today. Don't do this to me." She was still wrestling with it when Hector walked in, 5 minutes early for the first time. "Rough morning?" he asked, smiling faintly. "You could say that," she sighed. "The machine gave up on me. Guess we're out of luck for coffee. May I?" She blinked. "You know how to fix coffee machines." He shrugged out of his coat and stepped behind the counter like he'd done it 100 times. Used to fix bigger things than this, he said, rolling up his sleeves. In 10 minutes, he had the back panel off and wires exposed. See that, he said, pointing to a loose connection. That's your problem. Whoever maintained this last didn't know what they were doing. Mia watched, half impressed, half suspicious. How do you even know that? He smiled. Let's just say I've been around more factories than coffee shops. The machine hissed back to life. The smell of coffee filled the air like victory. Mia clapped her hands. Mr. Brooks. You're officially a hero. Coffee's on me today. Then I better break something else tomorrow, he said with a wink. It was the first time she'd ever seen him wink. It made her laugh harder than she expected. Over the following weeks, Mia noticed things she hadn't before. Hector's handwriting grew shakier each day. His right hand trembled when he lifted the pen, and sometimes, when he thought no one was looking, he'd flex his fingers slowly like he was coaxing them back to life. You okay, Mr. Brooks? She asked one morning, frowning. Just an old engine, he said lightly. Still runs, just takes longer to start. But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of pain, or maybe memory. She didn't press him. She just poured another cup and sat across from him for a few quiet minutes. One morning, she asked him, what do you write in there, anyway? You filled that notebook twice since I met you. He smiled, closing it gently. Stories. Memories. Things I don't want to forget. Like a diary? More like unfinished conversations. With who? He paused for a long time, then said softly, with myself. And with people I never got to say the right things to. There was a weight behind the words, one that settled somewhere between guilt and grace. Mia didn't ask more. But from that day on, every time she saw him writing, she wondered who those words were meant for. Her coworkers noticed her growing fondness for the old man, and they didn't hesitate to comment. Careful, Mia, said Tasha, the sarcastic line cook. Your boyfriend might start tipping in wisdom instead of cash. Mia rolled her eyes. He's old enough to be my granddad. Still, Brenda, the other waitress, smirked. You're glowing when he walks in. Glowing? Girl, that's just the reflection from the coffee machine. But deep down, Mia couldn't deny it, she did light up when he walked through that door. It was an attraction. It was something softer, safer. Something like hope. Because Hector didn't just ask about her kids or the weather, he remembered things. Tiny things. The kind of details most people forgot 5 minutes after you said them. He asked about Jasmine's art project, about the math test Caleb had dreaded, about whether Mia had ever found time to paint again. No one else ever asked. One morning, after a particularly rough night of juggling bills and broken sleep, Mia arrived at work to find a small brown envelope on the counter. Inside was a folded note in Hector's careful handwriting. Don't let the world convince you you're small. You're the reason some people still believe in good. No name, no explanation, just that. She folded it neatly and tucked it into her wallet, next to a picture of her kids. By late autumn, the ritual had become sacred. Hector's booth, their booth, was always ready before he arrived. She would set the coffee down at 8:14 sharp, smile, and say, "You're early," even if he wasn't. Sometimes he'd bring her little gifts, an old fountain pen, a rare coin, once even a small wooden carving of a bird. Picked it up years ago, he'd say. Seems like it belongs to someone who still looks up. And every time she tried to refuse, he'd just wave her off. Humor an old man, Mia. Their friendship was quiet but deep, built on unspoken understanding. He never treated her like a waitress. She never treated him like a burden. It was as if they met in the middle, where class, age, and pain disappeared for half an hour each morning. Sometimes, she'd catch him watching the sunrise through the diner window, a faint smile on his face. When she asked what he was thinking, he'd say, "About second chances." "Do you believe in them?" she asked once. He looked at her for a long time before answering. "I believe in people who give them. That winter morning, as frost glimmered on the glass, Mia poured Hector's usual coffee and noticed something new. His seat was empty again. Her chest tightened, but before worry could take hold, the door opened and he appeared, moving slower than usual. His coat looked heavier, his smile softer. "You're late," she teased. "Time runs differently when you're old," he said with a small grin. "Sometimes I forget it's still running." She laughed, but her heart ached at the truth in his words. When he stood to leave, she caught sight of his notebook again, the edges worn, the cover fraying. "What happens when you fill that one up?" she asked. He looked at her for a long time, then said quietly, "Then someone else starts the next chapter." She didn't understand what he meant. Not then. But she would. Because some people walk into your life quietly, and leave echoes you never forget. Some people walk into your life quietly, and leave echoes you never forget. That morning began like any other, but the air felt wrong. The diner's lights flickered awake one by one, humming against the dull hum of the old refrigerator. Outside, the city still yawned itself to life. But Mia felt it before she even tied her apron, something missing, something small but heavy. Hector Brooks always came at 8:14. Never 8:13, never 8:15. 8:14 sharp. The booth by the window was always waiting. His coffee cup sat there already, a quiet promise of routine. She poured it anyway, out of habit, out of hope, and watched the black swirl rise like steam from a memory. "Morning, Mia," called Brenda, flipping her notepad open. "Coffee for your VIP?" "Already poured," Mia replied softly. Brenda smiled faintly. "Man's more reliable than our manager." Mia smiled back, but it didn't reach her eyes. By 8:16, she glanced at the clock. By 8:20, she was glancing at the door every few seconds. By 8:30, she had refilled the cup twice just to keep it warm. The doorbell chimed each time someone entered, but it was never him, just strangers, tourists, faces that didn't know her routine. She told herself he'd probably overslept. Or maybe the rain had slowed him down. But a cold unease pressed in behind her ribs. By 9 o'clock, Mia had wiped the same counter 3 times. By 9:30, the coffee in Hector's cup had gone cold. She didn't pour it out. Couldn't. Her coworker Tasha noticed her glancing at the door again and again. Girl, he probably just had an appointment. Old people love hospitals more than diners. Mia frowned. He never misses breakfast. Not once in 4 months. So maybe he's got family visiting. She hesitated. He never talked about them. Tasha shrugged. Then maybe he should have. The words stung more than she expected. She didn't respond, just turned, grabbed the coffee pot, and poured herself a cup. But even the coffee tasted different that morning, too bitter, too still. The diner moved on without him. Plates clattered. Forks scraped. Conversations rose and fell like waves. But Mia's focus stayed locked on booth 7. She kept catching herself glancing there as if he might appear mid-conversation, apologizing for being late. She could almost hear his voice, low and kind, saying, "I told time to wait for me, but it never listens." At 10 o'clock, she caught herself staring through the rain-soaked glass, searching the street for his tan coat and that brown hat. At 10:15, she laughed quietly to herself, shaking her head. "You're being silly," she muttered. "He's fine." But her hands were trembling. At 11 o'clock, the door opened again. For a second, her heart leapt, but it was only a delivery man. "Package for the diner," he said. "Thanks," she murmured, disappointment sinking like lead. When she turned back, the booth still waited. Empty. By noon, rain began to pour, real rain, heavy and hard, drumming against the glass in waves. People rushed inside, umbrellas dripping, laughter filling the diner. But none of it touched her. Hector would have complained about a storm like this, she thought. Said it reminded him of the kind that made you think about everyone you ever lost. She swallowed hard and grabbed a towel to wipe a puddle near the door. "Where's your old man today?" one of the regulars asked with a chuckle, sipping his soup. Mia froze for half a second, then forced a smile. Probably hiding from this weather. Smart guy, he replied. She nodded but didn't answer. Because she knew something felt off, not wrong, but off. Like when the melody of a favorite song skips for just a beat too long. The diner clock ticked louder than usual. The light outside dimmed as the storm grew heavier. And that empty booth, sitting under the soft glow of the window, looked lonelier than she could bear. Around 2 p.m., the crowd thinned. Brenda went for her smoke break, and the hum of the diner quieted to the sound of rain and dishes. Mia stood behind the counter, eyes locked on that cup. The coffee was still there, cold and untouched. She thought of all the mornings he'd sat there, smiling up at her like she was the only part of his day that made sense. She thought of the way he'd talk about life without ever saying much about his own. She thought of how his hand had trembled last week when he'd written in that notebook. Her throat tightened. "Hey," Brenda said softly, returning from outside, shaking off her coat. "You okay?" "Yeah," Mia whispered. "You look pale." "I'm fine." She forced a smile. "Just tired." But she wasn't fine. She felt the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. When her shift ended, she couldn't bring herself to clear the table. She just stood there, staring at that half-full cup. Then, without thinking, she picked it up gently, cradling it the way you might hold a memory, and carried it home with her. Her apartment was small but warm, filled with the noise of her kids. Caleb was watching cartoons. Jasmine was at the table, coloring on an old cereal box. "Hey, Mama!" Caleb shouted, jumping into her arms. "Hey, baby," she said softly, kissing his forehead. Jasmine looked up. "You okay, Mom? You look sad." "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a long day." But she wasn't fine, and Jasmine could tell. Kids always do. After dinner, when the apartment quieted, Mia set Hector's coffee cup on the table by the window. She didn't know why, maybe to keep a piece of him close, maybe because it felt wrong to throw it away. The coffee had gone completely cold, its surface smooth and still. She sat across from it, staring into it like it held answers. Outside, the rain hadn't stopped. The streetlights glowed orange through the drizzle, casting slow-moving shadows across the wall. She thought about all their talks. About his laughter. About the way his voice softened when he spoke of second chances. Maybe he'd gotten sick. Maybe he was in the hospital. Or maybe... She couldn't finish the thought. Her eyes filled before she could stop them. "You said you'd see me tomorrow," she whispered into the silence. No one answered. She woke up early the next day, before dawn, unable to sleep. She brewed coffee out of instinct, poured 2 cups out of habit, one for her, one for him. When she arrived at the diner, her manager asked, "You okay, Mia? You look like you didn't sleep." "Didn't feel right to," she murmured. She set up booth 7 like always. Coffee. Plate. Napkin folded neatly. And waited. Each time the door opened, her heart lifted, and fell. The hours blurred. The laughter of strangers filled the space he used to. And though the diner was full, it felt painfully empty. Brenda caught her staring at the window again. "You really like that old man, huh?" Mia nodded quietly. "Yeah. He reminded me that there are still good people left." When her shift ended, she took a deep breath and sat in booth 7 for the first time. The vinyl seat was cool against her palms. From there, she could see the city moving outside, the people, the rain, the life that kept going whether you were ready or not. On the table, Hector's cup sat empty. She traced her finger along its rim, her throat aching. She whispered, "You better come back, old man." Then, softer, as if he could hear her from wherever he was, "Some people aren't supposed to disappear quietly." For the first time in years, booth 7 was silent, and the silence felt like loss. 3 mornings passed. 3 mornings of pouring coffee for a man who never came back. The routine had started to feel like a ritual now, a quiet memorial between the ticking clock and the hiss of the grill. Every day, Mia poured Hector's coffee first thing at 8:14, like muscle memory, like faith. Every day, it grew cold untouched. Every day, she told herself maybe tomorrow. But that Friday morning, something felt different. The rain had stopped, but the air outside still carried the heaviness of a storm that hadn't really left. Inside, the diner was half full, construction workers, an elderly couple, a young woman on her phone. The familiar buzz of chatter filled the room, but under it all, there was something sharp in the air, like anticipation. Mia didn't know it yet, but her world was about to tilt. It began with headlights, bright, sharp, and too clean for this side of town. Four black SUVs rolled up in front of the diner, one after another, engines humming like predators and idle. The sound alone made people stop mid-bite. Brenda froze halfway through pouring coffee for a truck driver. Even the fry cook, Pete, peeked up from the sizzling grill. "What on earth?" someone murmured. The diner door opened. 4 men stepped in, each wearing immaculate black suits, earpieces gleaming beneath cropped hair. They scanned the room in silence, their presence too polished, too purposeful. The clatter of forks faded. The music from the old jukebox died somewhere between tracks. Then the 5th man entered. He wasn't old, but his face carried the kind of power that didn't need words to announce itself. His charcoal suit fit like armor. His shoes made soft, decisive clicks against the linoleum. His eyes, cold, piercing gray, swept through the diner, calculating everything, missing nothing. Tony Brooks. The son of the man who never came back. The diner seemed to shrink as he walked in. He didn't stop at the counter. Didn't look around. Didn't need to. His gaze found Mia instantly, the woman standing frozen behind the coffee machine, a pot still half raised in her hand. He moved toward her, slow but deliberate. The bodyguards fanned out behind him like a silent wall of authority. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. A fork clattered onto a plate somewhere in the corner. Mia felt her pulse rise in her throat. Who was this man? And why did the air around him feel like judgment? He stopped just a few feet away from her. "Are you Mia Ramos?" he asked, voice deep, firm, and cold enough to slice through the tension. Her hand trembled slightly as she set the coffee pot down. "Yes, sir," she said quietly. "Can I help you?" His eyes flicked toward booth 7. The empty seat. The untouched cup. "You're the one who served my father breakfast every morning," he said, not asking, but stating. The diner went still. All sound drained out like someone had pulled the plug. Mia blinked, confused. "Your father?" He nodded once. "Hector Brooks." Her breath caught. It was like hearing a name in past tense for the first time. Like seeing a familiar word written in a different language. "Hector," she whispered. "Your father?" Tony's expression didn't change. "He passed away 2 nights ago." The world narrowed. The background noise, the faint buzz of the ceiling light, the rain tapping faintly outside, the sound of the fryer, all fell away until all that remained was the echo of those 5 words. He passed away 2 nights ago. Mia's lips parted, but no sound came out. The words wouldn't form. Her eyes flicked toward booth 7 again, as if expecting him to be there, smiling under that old tan coat. "No," she finally breathed. "He was fine. He was here just a few days ago. He said he'd be back Monday." Tony's gaze softened, just barely. "He didn't make it to Monday." Her hands gripped the counter for balance. How did he?" "In his sleep," Tony said simply. "Peacefully." The word peacefully didn't feel peaceful at all. It felt final. Heavy. Irrevocable. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence pressed between them like glass. It was strange, the grief that bloomed in her chest. Mia barely knew him beyond breakfast plates and small talk, and yet it felt like she'd lost something deeply personal. Something steady. Something kind. He had been the one person who saw her. Not as a waitress, not as a struggling mother, but as a person. She blinked fast, forcing back tears, but one escaped anyway, sliding down her cheek. She turned quickly, wiping it with the back of her hand. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to, he was a good man." Tony watched her closely. His jaw tightened, the way it does when someone's fighting an emotion they don't want to admit they have. "He talked about you," he said finally. That made her freeze. "About me?" He nodded once, slipping a hand into his coat pocket. "My father didn't talk about many people. But when he did, he mentioned a waitress. Said she made him believe kindness still existed." Mia's breath hitched. "He said that?" Tony's tone was unreadable. "He said it every time I saw him. Which wasn't often enough." She looked at him then, really looked. The resemblance was faint, hidden under power and polish, but it was there. The same gray eyes, the same quiet dignity, only colder now, sharper. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said sincerely. He nodded curtly, like it was a formality they both needed to get through. Then, his next words sliced through the fog. "My father left something for you." Mia frowned. "For me?" "Yes." Tony's tone softened slightly, but only slightly. "He told me, if I ever wanted to understand what kind of man he really was, I should start here." He pulled a small white envelope from his inner pocket, sealed and marked with neat handwriting, familiar handwriting. HB in faded blue ink. Her heart pounded as she reached for it with shaking hands. "What is it?" "I don't know," Tony said. "He didn't tell me. Just said it belonged to the woman who served him breakfast every morning." For a long moment, Mia couldn't speak. She could only stare at the envelope, the edges soft from being handled, the ink slightly smudged as if written in haste, or with emotion. Brenda's voice broke the silence from behind the counter. "Mia, what's going on? Who is this man?" Mia didn't answer. She was lost in the weight of what was happening. Tony turned to leave, but then paused at the door. He looked back at her, eyes narrowing just a little. "Whatever's in there," he said, changed how he saw the world. "I guess now it's your turn." And just like that, he was gone. The bell above the door jingled faintly as the SUVs outside started up again, one by one, their engines fading into the city's hum. When they left, the silence they left behind was deafening. People started whispering, first quietly, then in small bursts. Was that really Hector's son? Bodyguards, man. What did she get herself into? Did the old man leave her money? Mia ignored them. She just stood there, holding that envelope, feeling the weight of it pulse in her palm. It wasn't money. She knew that instinctively. Hector wasn't a man of transactions. He was a man of meaning. Her manager approached slowly. "Mia, you okay?" She nodded, though her voice trembled. "Yeah. I just need a minute." She turned away from the counter and looked at booth 7 one last time. The cup was still there. The chair still empty. The window still fogged from the rain. But something in the air had shifted. Hector Brooks was gone. But somehow, the world hadn't let go of him yet. That night, when she finally got home, she sat at her small kitchen table under the hum of the old ceiling light. The kids were asleep. The city outside buzzed faintly. She stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded carefully. Her eyes blurred as she read the first line in Hector's familiar handwriting. "For every morning you reminded me I was still human, this place is yours now. Keep serving people with heart." In that instant, the waitress who had served breakfast became part of a story she never knew she was in. The black SUV returned the next morning. Mia hadn't slept much. The letter Hector left sat on her nightstand, folded and refolded until the paper felt warm from her hands. The words kept echoing in her head, "This place is yours now." It didn't make sense. The Sunrise Diner wasn't his to give, was it? And yet, somehow, she believed him. When the car door opened and a man in a dark suit stepped out, she already knew they were there for her. Ms. Ramos, the driver said, polite but detached. Mr. Brooks requested your presence at Sterling and Frost Law Offices, downtown. Downtown. She'd never been past the edge of that skyline, the glass towers that glittered above everything she knew. She hesitated, then nodded. Okay. Just, give me a minute. She told Brenda to cover her shift. Brenda didn't ask questions this time, her eyes were full of curiosity and envy. Within minutes, the car's doors closed softly behind Mia, sealing her into a world of leather seats, cool air, and silence. She pressed her palms against her knees, watching through tinted glass as the streets changed, from cracked sidewalks and corner stores to sleek buildings and quiet power. By the time they stopped, she already felt out of place. The office building towered over her, all steel and glass, like something from another planet. Inside, the floor gleamed, reflecting her worn sneakers and faded jeans like a reminder she didn't belong here. A receptionist led her to a conference room that looked more like a movie set than a place for paperwork. Long mahogany table. Framed cityscapes on the walls. Coffee that smelled like money. Tony Brooks was already there. He stood by the window, staring down at the skyline like it was his kingdom. His reflection looked untouchable, the son of a man she'd served coffee to for years, but somehow, completely different. When he turned, their eyes met. His were colder today. Ms. Ramos, he said evenly. Thank you for coming. She nodded awkwardly. I wasn't sure if I should. You were named in my father's will, he replied. You had to. Before she could respond, the door opened, and an older man in a navy suit entered with a leather briefcase. His presence was calm, professional, a man used to dealing with legacies and secrets. Good morning, he said, offering a small smile. I'm Mr. Dalton, executor of Mr. Hector Brooks' estate. Thank you for being here. He sat down, opened the briefcase, and drew out several folders. Tony folded his arms. Mia sat gingerly at the far end of the table, feeling small beside the silence that followed. Mr. Dalton adjusted his glasses and began to read. I, Hector L. Brooks, being of sound mind and body, hereby declare this document as my last will and testament. The words felt unreal, too official for the man she remembered sipping coffee with a quiet smile. Dalton's voice continued, smooth and deliberate. To my son, Anthony Brooks, I leave full ownership of Brooks Industries and all accompanying assets and investments. Tony didn't flinch. He expected that part. Dalton turned a page. And to Ms. Mia Ramos. Mia's breath caught. I leave ownership of the Sunrise Diner located on Maple and 3rd, including all property, assets, and contents within, along with a personal letter addressed in my handwriting. The room went still. For a second, all she could hear was the hum of the air conditioner. I don't understand, Mia stammered. The diner isn't his. It belongs to. It belonged to him, Dalton said gently. Mr. Brooks purchased it under a holding company 12 years ago. It's been his all along. Mia blinked in disbelief. The diner, her diner, was his. He'd owned it all this time? Tony finally spoke, his voice sharp. You're saying my father secretly owned that rundown diner and left it to a waitress? Dalton's gaze didn't waver. That's correct. Tony gave a short, humorless laugh. Of course he did. Dalton slid a smaller envelope across the table toward Mia, the same familiar handwriting across the front, to Mia, who reminded me what warmth feels like. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. The faint scent of old paper and Hector's cologne drifted out. She began to read silently, but her voice cracked midway through, and she whispered the rest aloud. Mia. You reminded me what humanity feels like, what decency sounds like in a world that's forgotten how to listen. This diner became my refuge, not because of the coffee, but because of your kindness. I watched you smile through exhaustion, laugh through pain, and give to others even when life gave you little back. You helped me remember that wealth without heart is just noise. This place is yours now. Keep serving people with the same warmth you gave me. And when the mornings feel heavy, remember, kindness is never wasted. Hector Brooks. Her eyes glistened as she finished reading. The words sat in the air like something sacred. Tony shifted in his chair, clearing his throat. So, my father gave her the diner because she served him breakfast? Dalton shot him a warning glance. Mr. Brooks, your father's intentions were clear. He valued Ms. Ramos' humanity. Tony leaned forward, voice edged with sarcasm. He valued a waitress more than his own family? Mia looked up sharply, her voice steady despite the tremor underneath. He didn't value me more. He just saw something you might have forgotten to look for. The room went silent again. Tony exhaled slowly, pushing back from the table. You think you know him, don't you? You think serving him coffee gave you insight into the man he was. I didn't know him, she admitted softly. But I saw him. That's all most people need, to be seen. Tony's jaw flexed, but he said nothing. His eyes flickered with something almost human, hurt, maybe, or guilt, before hardening again. Dalton closed the folder gently. There's nothing else required of either of you today. Ms. Ramos, I'll have the transfer documents prepared. You'll receive full legal ownership within a week. Mia blinked, stunned. You mean? I actually. Yes, Dalton said kindly. The diner is yours. The room felt too bright. Too unreal. Mia stood, clutching the letter like it was oxygen. She looked at Tony one last time. I didn't ask for this, she said quietly. I just treated him the way I'd want someone to treat me. Tony's gaze met hers, sharp but conflicted. And somehow, that was enough to earn a building. She didn't respond. Because she knew it wasn't about the building. It was about what happened inside it. She turned toward the door, her heart pounding in her ears. As she stepped back into the marble hallway, her reflection flashed in the polished floor, the same tired waitress shoes, the same faded apron folded under her arm, but something inside her had shifted. She had walked in as an employee. She was walking out as an owner. And as she reached the elevator, clutching the letter to her chest, she whispered to herself, he really meant it. Inside the conference room, Tony remained seated long after she left. His expression was unreadable, but his fingers drummed restlessly against the table. Dalton gathered his papers. Your father respected her deeply, Mr. Brooks. You might find that worth understanding. Tony's voice was low. She's not who he thought she was. Nobody is that selfless. Dalton smiled faintly. Your father once said the same thing, before he met her. That evening, Mia walked back to the diner just as the sun dipped low, spilling gold through the windows. She paused outside, staring at the familiar sign, the chipped paint, the window where Hector always sat. She unlocked the door, turned on the lights, and whispered, "Guess I'll keep serving, just like you asked." The diner hummed back to life, soft and warm, as if it had been waiting for her all along. She went to serve coffee that morning, and walked out owning the place she once begged to keep her job in. The morning after the will reading, the city woke up as usual. But for Mia, the world had shifted. The diner, her diner, stood quietly in the early light, the neon open sign flickering like a heartbeat restarting after shock. She ran her hand over the counter, still half expecting to hear Hector's soft voice asking for coffee. She was now the owner of the place where she'd spent years fighting exhaustion, rude customers, and rent deadlines. It should have felt like victory. But something about Tony Brooks' stare the day before lingered like a storm cloud. He didn't believe her. And somehow, she knew this wasn't over. 2 days later, just before the lunch rush, a pair of men in tailored suits stepped into the diner. They didn't look like the usual crowd of truckers and locals. "Good afternoon," one said, flashing a polite but empty smile. "We're with Brooks Holdings. We'd like to ask a few questions regarding the late Mr. Hector Brooks." Mia set down her coffee pot slowly. "About what?" "About your relationship with him," the other replied, pulling a small notebook from his jacket. Her coworkers froze. Brenda, wiping down a counter, shot her a wide-eyed look. Customers glanced up, forks paused midair. My relationship? Mia repeated, confused. I served him breakfast. That's it. The taller man smiled thinly. Daily, for almost 3 years. That's quite a lot of breakfasts. Mia frowned. So what? He was a kind man. Is that a crime now? The second man ignored her tone and began jotting notes. Did he ever give you money, Ms. Ramos? Gifts? Loans? Anything of value? Just tips, she said tightly. Like any other customer. What about after hours? Did you meet outside of work? Her stomach turned. Excuse me? The first man looked up calmly. We're simply verifying whether Mr. Brooks was of sound mind when he altered his will last spring. You can understand our concern. Mia's jaw clenched. No, I don't understand. I think you're trying to make me look like something I'm not. Brenda finally spoke up from behind the counter. She's been serving that man longer than most of you probably worked for him. He liked his coffee black and his toast plain. That's all it ever was. The investigators exchanged a look, scribbled a few more notes, and left with professional politeness, but their presence left the diner colder than before. Across town, in a penthouse overlooking the skyline, Tony Brooks sat behind a glass desk littered with folders. The city looked small from up here, everything neatly arranged, just like the empire his father built. He should have been preparing for a board meeting. Instead, his computer screen displayed background checks. Mia Ramos. Age, 29. Occupation, waitress. 2 children. No criminal record. No lawsuits. Just ordinary. And yet, something about her unsettled him. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing the bridge of his nose. His assistant, Vanessa, stood by the desk, reading from a tablet. She's clean, Tony. Lived in the same apartment for 7 years. Works 6 days a week. Her references check out. Everyone describes her as kind, honest, and tired. He looked up sharply. Nobody's that perfect. Vanessa hesitated. Maybe she didn't do anything wrong. Then why her? He snapped. My father knew thousands of people. He ran charities, mentored CEOs, funded schools. Why give her a diner? Vanessa didn't answer. Tony swiveled his chair toward the skyline again, jaw tight. He barely spoke to me the last decade of his life, he said quietly. And suddenly, a waitress becomes his confidant. You expect me to believe that's coincidence? By the end of the week, the whispers had started. Customers looked at her differently, curious, cautious. Some offered sympathy, others eyed her like she'd stolen something. When a local paper ran a small column titled Waitress Inherits Diner from Retired Tycoon, the rumors spread faster than she could serve coffee. One night, after closing, she sat in Hector's booth, staring at the empty seat across from her. Did you know this would happen? She murmured. Did you know your son would think I tricked you? The silence felt heavy. Only the hum of the refrigerator answered. She took Hector's letter from her apron pocket, the one she now carried everywhere, and unfolded it again. Beneath the main note, she noticed faint pencil lines on the back page. She squinted, tracing the words with her thumb. It was his handwriting, faded and unsteady. I hope my son finds her. She listens the way his mother once did. Her breath caught. It wasn't just about kindness. It was about connection. He'd seen something in her, something Tony had lost. Tears blurred her eyes, but she blinked them away, whispering, You really did believe in me, didn't you? Meanwhile, Tony sat in his father's study, a room he hadn't entered since the funeral. The scent of leather and old books hung in the air. Everything was meticulously organized, except for the journals. Hector's personal notebooks filled an entire shelf. Tony hesitated, then pulled one down, dated 2 years ago. The pages were filled with small, neat handwriting, part memoir, part reflection. He skimmed through the entries until a familiar word caught his eye. The diner. Booth by the window. The girl who remembers how I like my coffee. She doesn't know who I am, and that's why I go back. Tony frowned, flipping further. She talks about her children like they're stars she's trying to keep lit. I just listen. It's strange how listening feels like healing. He turned another page. Mia Ramos, the one who listens. Tony froze. There it was again. That name. Written not once, but many times. In a dozen entries across months. Each note painted the same picture, an old man rediscovering purpose through the kindness of a woman who never asked for anything in return. His father's words weren't about manipulation. They were gratitude. Admiration. And maybe, regret. Tony closed the journal, pressing it against his chest for a moment. His throat tightened, but pride smothered it. He slid the book back onto the shelf and told himself it didn't matter. But the truth had already started to crack something inside him. 2 weeks after the first investigation, Tony appeared at the diner himself. No bodyguards this time. Just him, suit crisp, expression unreadable. The bell above the door jingled, and every head in the diner turned. Mia looked up from behind the counter. Her pulse quickened, but she didn't flinch. "Mr. Brooks," she said evenly. "Back for breakfast, or just more questions?" He walked closer. "Just answers." "Well, you'll have to sit down like everyone else." Her tone wasn't defiant, just steady. Grounded. The kind of calm that came from surviving storms before. Tony sat in Hector's old booth. The same corner. The same window. It felt strange, like stepping into someone else's memories. Mia brought a cup of black coffee, setting it down with quiet precision. "He always liked 2 sugars," she said softly. Said it reminded him that even the bitter things can be sweetened. Tony stared at the cup. "You talk about him like he was family." She met his gaze. "He was kind to me." "That's family enough." He hesitated. "Did he ever tell you about me?" Mia nodded slowly. "Only once. He said he hoped you'd forgive him when you were ready to see the man, not the mistakes." Tony's eyes darkened, but something flickered there, guilt, maybe, or understanding. He didn't reply. After a long silence, he said, "You could have sold this place already. Made a fortune." "I don't want a fortune," she said. "I want to keep it alive." This place mattered to him. "It matters to me." He studied her face, searching for an angle, a lie, anything that would make her fit the story he'd built in his head. But there was nothing there but truth. He took a sip of the coffee, then stood abruptly. "Enjoy your diner, Ms. Ramos. I'm sure it'll make a great charity headline." He left before she could answer. That night, Tony sat in his car outside the diner long after it closed. Through the fogged window, he saw her sweeping the floor, humming softly, the same quiet rhythm his father once described. He opened his father's notebook again, rereading the line that had haunted him since he found it. "If my son ever finds her, tell him she's the proof I didn't fail completely." For the first time, Tony wondered if his father's final gift wasn't about money or property, but about reminding him what decency looked like. He started the engine, but couldn't drive away. The next morning, Mia pinned Hector's letter on the diner wall, framed and protected, where every customer could read it. Beneath it, she wrote a single line. "Kindness is not weakness. It's the wealth that never runs out." Outside, a black car idled for a moment before pulling away. Tony had seen it. But he wasn't ready to face what it meant. Suspicion is a cruel thing. It blinds you to the truth even when it's written in front of you. It was late evening at the Sunrise Diner, and the rain had been falling for hours. The neon sign outside blinked faintly against the wet glass, casting a trembling glow over the empty booths. Mia stood behind the counter, wiping down surfaces that were already spotless. Sometimes, when the diner was quiet, she could almost hear Hector's voice, soft, polite, always beginning with, "How's your day starting, Mia?" It had been nearly a month since his passing, and yet he lingered here, in the air, in the coffee smell, in every quiet corner of the place he'd loved. That night, while closing up, she noticed something. The lost and found box under the register, an old tin container filled with oddities customers left behind, was heavier than usual. Out of habit, she began sorting through it, a child's toy car, a scarf, a watch missing its strap. Then she saw it. A worn brown notebook, the leather soft and cracked with age. Her breath caught immediately. Hector's notebook. The one he always carried. The one he scribbled in between sips of coffee. The one no one had seen since the day he didn't come back. Mia froze, her hand trembling slightly as she lifted it out. The pages were frayed at the edges, the cover marked with faint coffee stains. A small gold pen was tucked neatly inside, the same one she'd seen him use 100 times. She looked around the empty diner, heart pounding. Then, carefully, she sat at his booth, booth 7, and opened it. The handwriting was neat but uneven, each line pressed with quiet care. The first pages were simple notes, grocery lists, quotes, and little sketches of the diner's window and the coffee cups. But as she turned the pages, the tone changed. The writing became more personal, more haunted. Wealth built me a tower. Pride locked me in it. And when I finally looked down, I realized I'd built it alone. Mia's eyes welled. She turned the page. Money took my son away. Or maybe I pushed him. I told myself I was preparing him for power, but all I did was teach him how to live without love. She paused, the air thickening around her. Hector had never once mentioned his son, not by name, not by memory. But here, the pages were filled with Tony. Each sentence was both confession and apology. He became everything I told him to be, strong, cold, unbreakable. I can't blame him. He learned from the best mistake I ever made. Mia swallowed hard, flipping another page. The ink smudged slightly near the corner, as if touched by tears, his, maybe. Then she found the line that made her heart stop. If my son ever finds her, tell him she's the proof I didn't fail completely. Her hand pressed over her mouth. He had written about her. Not just as a passing note, but as the proof that he had done something right before leaving the world. She stared at the page, reading it again and again, her tears finally spilling freely. For years, she'd served him coffee, listened to his silence, and thought it was nothing more than kindness returned. But Hector had been leaving something far deeper behind, a message, a bridge between two worlds that had stopped talking long ago. The bell above the door jingled suddenly, snapping her out of her daze. It was late, too late for customers. Mia looked up to see Tony Brooks standing in the doorway. He wasn't wearing his usual armor of business, no suit jacket, no tie. Just a dark shirt, sleeves rolled up, and an expression somewhere between exhaustion and defiance. But the 4 men behind him, the bodyguards, reminded her that power still followed him like a shadow. He spotted her at the booth and walked straight toward her. "Mia," he said flatly. "We need to talk." Her heart began to race, but she kept her composure. "You could have called." "I don't do calls," he replied. His gaze fell to the table. "Is that it? His notebook?" Her fingers instinctively closed around it. "How do you know about this?" Tony's jaw flexed. "It went missing from his estate. It was supposed to be part of the archived documents. Someone said it might have ended up here." "It didn't end up here," she said quietly. "It belonged here." He looked irritated. "Mia, that notebook contains personal notes, private reflections, possibly even company details. My legal team needs to review it." She shook her head. "There's nothing about your company in here." "You've read it?" "Yes," she said firmly. "And I think you should too, not as a CEO, but as a son." Tony exhaled sharply, stepping closer. "You don't get to tell me how to read my father's words. You didn't know him like I did." "No," she said softly. "I knew the man he became after he stopped pretending he was one." The diner felt too small for both of them. Rain drummed hard against the glass as thunder rolled in the distance. Tony's eyes flicked to the notebook again. "Give it to me, Mia." I'm not asking twice. She didn't move. Do you really think this is about protecting your company? She asked quietly. This was never about money, Tony. It's about him trying to reach you. His tone hardened. He had his chance to reach me. She stood now, facing him fully. Maybe he did, and you weren't listening. The silence that followed was thick enough to break. One of the bodyguards shifted uneasily by the door, sensing tension but not daring to intervene. Mia opened the notebook again and turned it toward him. Here. Read this one. Tony hesitated, then leaned slightly closer. The words were written in the same careful hand as before. If I could go back, I'd trade every company I ever built for one more morning at that booth, just to tell my son I love him. Tony's expression faltered. He swallowed hard, looking away. Mia continued softly, he wrote that right here, sitting where you're standing. He looked at her, his voice breaking the quiet. You think reading this fixes 20 years? No, she said. But it's a start. He reached for the notebook again, slower this time, but Mia pulled it close to her chest. You can have it, she said, once you understand what you're holding. Because this isn't your father's legacy. It's his apology. Tony blinked, caught off guard by the conviction in her voice. She went on, her tone trembling but strong. He didn't leave this to protect his name or his company. He left it because he knew his son needed a reason to forgive, not a lawyer to explain why. For a moment, the room was utterly still except for the sound of rain. Then Tony said quietly, you talk like you knew him better than I did. Mia smiled sadly. Maybe I just listened longer. Tony sank into the booth across from her, rubbing his temples. For the first time, he looked less like a billionaire and more like a lost boy. I spent my whole life trying to earn his approval, he murmured. Every deal, every success, I thought one day he'd say, I'm proud of you. But when he finally called last year, all he wanted to talk about was this damn diner. Said there was someone here I should meet. He gave a bitter laugh. I hung up. Mia studied him for a long moment. Then she slid the notebook across the table. He was right, she said softly. You did need to come here. Tony looked down at the worn cover, running his hand over the creases his father's fingers once made. Then he opened it, not as a CEO reclaiming property, but as a son finally brave enough to face what was left behind. His eyes moved slowly across the words. With each line, his expression shifted, arrogance fading into grief, grief into realization. He stopped at one passage that read. One day, he'll walk into this diner. I won't be here, but maybe she will be. And if she is, I hope she serves him coffee and kindness, the two things this world never gives enough of. Tony's throat tightened. He looked up, and for the first time, his eyes weren't cold. They were human. When he finally closed the notebook, Tony stood quietly. The rain had eased outside, replaced by the faint hum of the city at night. He turned to Mia. You're right, he said simply. It's not mine to hide. She nodded. He wanted you to understand him, not defend him. Tony looked around the diner, at the chipped tiles, the flickering light, the photo of Hector that Mia had framed behind the counter. A small smile tugged at his mouth. He really loved this place, didn't he? Mia's voice softened. No, Tony. He loved what this place reminded him of, that kindness doesn't need to be bought. He took one last look at the notebook, then handed it back to her. Keep it safe, he said. Maybe I'll come by sometime. Not as Brooks Industries, but just Tony. She smiled faintly. We open at 8. First coffee's on the house. As Tony walked out into the night, the rain had stopped, but the streets still glistened with reflections of light. He paused beside the SUV, looking back through the diner window. Inside, Mia sat again at the booth, the notebook open, a faint smile on her face, the same booth where his father had rediscovered his humanity. Tony whispered to himself, he didn't fail completely. Then he got into the car and drove away. Inside, Mia turned the notebook to a fresh page and wrote in careful script. Truth doesn't hide in vaults, it hides in people who care. She closed the cover, placed it beside the coffee pot, and whispered, "Good night, Mr. Brooks." Truth doesn't hide in vaults, it hides in people who care. The clock above the counter ticked softly in the dim light. Outside, the Sunrise Diner was wrapped in silence, the kind of stillness that comes after a storm, when everything seems to be holding its breath. Mia had just finished locking the front door when she saw the glare of headlights cutting across the wet pavement. She frowned. No one ever came this late. The engine shut off, and a sleek black car door opened. Tony Brooks stepped out, no tie, no bodyguards this time, just the same look of restrained fury that had haunted his face since the will reading. His shoes splashed through puddles as he approached the diner. Mia's heart tightened. She could sense something heavy in his stride, a storm not of rain, but of grief, confusion, and pride. He reached the glass door and knocked, his jaw set. Mia hesitated, then unlatched the door and opened it halfway. "Tony," she said cautiously. "We're closed." He brushed past her without a word, the smell of wet asphalt following him in. "I needed to see it for myself," he said, pacing the floor. "The place my father spent his last years pretending to be a saint." Mia turned slowly, watching him circle the diner like a man inspecting the ruins of his own home. "Pretending?" she asked quietly. He shot her a look. "You really think he came here out of kindness?" He was escaping. From responsibility, from me, from everything he built. She folded her arms. "Maybe he was escaping something, yes. But not from you, from what pride turned him into." Tony's laugh was sharp, bitter. "Don't do that. Don't psychoanalyze a man you barely knew." Her voice stayed calm. "I knew the man who drank my coffee every morning and remembered my children's names. Who rode in silence but smiled when the rain fell. The man who left this place better than he found it." Tony's jaw clenched. "He left me a mess. You got the diner, I got the empire. Tell me, Mia, who do you think he loved more?" Mia didn't answer. She just turned and walked toward the wall beside the counter. "Come here," she said softly. He hesitated, frowning, but followed. There, on the wall, hung a simple corkboard, cluttered with photographs. Most were faded snapshots, families smiling over plates of pancakes, old men playing cards in the corner booth, kids laughing with ice cream sundaes too big for their hands. Tony stared. "What is this?" Mia's hand rested on one of the photos. Hector, grinning ear to ear as a small girl handed him a drawing. "This," she said, "is your father's legacy. Not the buildings or the stock market tickers. These people." Tony leaned closer, recognizing the old man's gentle eyes, the warmth in his smile, a version of his father he didn't know existed. Mia continued, her voice steady but tender. "He paid for that girl's hospital bills after she broke her leg. Quietly. He slipped grocery money into that couple's envelope when they lost their home. He covered a stranger's college tuition, Tony, a dishwasher's son. No one ever knew it was him. He didn't want credit." Tony stared at the pictures, his reflection flickering faintly in the glass. "My father did all this?" His voice cracked, disbelief and guilt woven together. Mia nodded. "You called it escaping. I think he called it redeeming." He turned sharply, his tone flaring again. "You make it sound so noble. But where was that man when I needed a father? When I was killing myself trying to be good enough for him?" His voice rose. "He gave them kindness, but he left me with silence." Mia's eyes filled with quiet empathy. She stepped closer, her tone low and unflinching. "He didn't give up on you, Tony. He just didn't know how to reach you anymore." Tony's anger cracked. He looked away, his hands trembling slightly. "He could have tried." "He did," she whispered. She reached under the counter and pulled out the brown notebook, Hector's final words resting in her palm. Every page in here was him trying. Tony's eyes fell to it, his anger softening under the weight of grief. Mia opened the notebook to a page she had marked with a folded napkin. She handed it to him. I built walls to keep out pain, and they kept out my son. If love is a door, then pride is the lock that rusts it shut. Tony read it once, twice, and then closed his eyes. His throat tightened, the tension in his shoulders gave way to something deeper, regret. He sank slowly into the booth, running a hand through his hair. All my life, I blamed him for not coming back. But maybe I never gave him the chance to. Mia sat across from him, her voice a whisper now. He waited for you, Tony. In his own way. Every morning, he sat in that booth and wrote. I think he hoped one day you'd walk through that door. Tony looked at her, tears brimming but refusing to fall. And what would he have said if I did? She smiled sadly. Probably what he said to me every morning, how's your day starting? That broke him. Tony pressed a hand over his eyes, his chest rising unevenly as a soft, strangled sound escaped, part sob, part exhale. The walls around him finally gave way. For the first time, the heir of Brooks Industries cried, not for the empire he ran, but for the father he never got to love properly. Mia said nothing. She let the silence hold him, the kind of silence that heals more than words. After a long while, Tony looked up, his eyes red but clear. You know, he said hoarsely, he used to tell me that success was measured by how many people feared your name. Mia tilted her head. And now? He gave a weak laugh, shaking his head. Now I think he was wrong. Maybe success is when people remember you with warmth. She smiled faintly. Then he finally learned it. Right here. Tony looked around, at the cracked tiles, the old counter, the smell of burnt coffee and syrup, and exhaled. He really loved this place. He loved the peace it gave him, Mia said. It was the only place he could just be Hector, not Mr. Brooks. He nodded slowly, absorbing her words. The rain outside had stopped, but the streetlights still shimmered on the wet pavement like tears that hadn't dried. Tony stood, sliding his hands into his pockets. You know, I used to think people like you were background characters, the kind you pass by without seeing. Mia chuckled softly. Most people still do. He looked at her. My father saw you. And so do you, she said gently. Now. For a long moment, neither spoke. The diner felt almost sacred, like a place where ghosts and the living could finally breathe the same air. Tony finally whispered, I never gave him the chance. Mia reached across the table and touched the notebook lightly. Then maybe this is yours now, not to keep, but to carry. Tony met her eyes. You're giving it to me? I'm sharing it, she said. He left it for both of us, to finish what he started. He nodded slowly, taking the notebook in both hands, as though it were something fragile and holy. I don't know what to say, he murmured. You don't have to say anything, she replied. Just keep showing up. He glanced at her, confused. Showing up? Yeah, she said softly, smiling. That's what your father did, until one day he couldn't. Maybe now it's your turn. Tony's expression shifted, the faintest hint of a smile beneath the exhaustion. Maybe it is. He looked toward the door, then back at the diner, taking one last slow look around. You know, for a small place, it feels bigger than life. Mia chuckled. That's because love tends to stretch the walls. As Tony stepped out into the cool night air, the city lights reflected in the puddles at his feet. The storm had passed, but inside him, something new had begun, a quiet peace, fragile but real. He looked back through the glass one last time. Mia was behind the counter, wiping the table where his father once sat. The same table where a broken old man had found redemption. Tony whispered under his breath, You didn't fail, Dad, you just finished differently. And for the first time in his life, he smiled without force. Because in that small diner, surrounded by flickering lights, faded booths, and the lingering scent of coffee, the empire's heir found something he'd never known before, humility. The morning light stretched across the cracked windows of the Sunrise Diner, painting the booths in soft gold. The smell of sizzling bacon and brewed coffee filled the air again, comforting, familiar, alive. But something was different now. The seat by the window, Hector's booth, no longer felt like an empty memory. It felt like a heartbeat, one that had found new rhythm. It began quietly, almost unannounced. Tony Brooks started showing up. No motorcade. No black SUVs. No tailored suit or sharp tie. Just jeans, a button-up, and the faint air of a man trying to remember how to breathe. The first time he came, the staff froze. Even Mia had to blink twice, unsure if she was seeing a ghost or a miracle. He simply nodded, walked to the corner booth, and sat down. "Black coffee," he said softly. Mia poured it, her hands steady, her smile warm but restrained. "2 sugars, right?" He looked up, a small smirk tugging at his mouth. "So he told you everything, huh?" She shook her head. "No, just what mattered." She set the cup before him, steam curling into the morning air. For a long moment, they both said nothing, two people connected by a man who no longer sat between them, yet somehow was everywhere in the room. From that day, it became a new ritual. Tony came every few mornings. Sometimes he read the newspaper. Sometimes he just stared out the window. Other times, he said nothing at all, and Mia didn't push him to. He didn't need conversation, he needed quiet. And somehow, she understood. Each time he left, he'd nod politely, drop a tip that was far too much, and walk out before she could say thank you. But the gratitude was mutual, wordless, soft, unspoken. Weeks passed. Seasons shifted. What started as occasional visits became routine. One afternoon, Tony came in carrying a brown envelope. He looked more at ease this time, less CEO, more human. Mia was refilling sugar jars when he sat down. "I wanted you to be the first to see this," he said, sliding the envelope across the counter. She opened it slowly. Inside was a glossy brochure, the cover read, "The Brooks Legacy Fund Empowering Young Dreamers Through Education." Below the title was a photograph of Hector Brooks, smiling faintly, standing in front of a city skyline. Mia's throat tightened. You did this for him?" Tony nodded. "And because of you," he said. "He talked about you in his journals, Mia. He said you reminded him what decency looked like." She blinked back sudden tears, tracing the printed words with her finger. "A scholarship fund?" He leaned back, smiling faintly. "For kids who work hard, who don't have a safety net. My father believed people like that deserve a chance. I think he learned that from you." Mia laughed softly. "Me? I just poured him coffee." Tony shook his head. "No. You gave him something even billionaires can't buy: time, kindness, and someone who listened." The air between them grew warm with meaning. Outside, traffic hummed, life moved, and yet inside the diner, time felt suspended, like the world had slowed down to acknowledge something sacred. As the months passed, the Brooks Legacy Fund became real, not just a project, but a movement. Local newspapers ran stories about it. Billionaire CEO launches scholarship program in honor of late father. Community Waitress inspires legacy fund that changes lives. Mia's name wasn't in the headlines, but she didn't mind. The diner stayed full. The regulars came not just for breakfast, but for the feeling that lingered, the quiet dignity of good hearts remembered. And for the first time in her life, she felt secure. Truly secure. Because one morning, a letter arrived, embossed with gold lettering from a downtown law firm. Mia opened it slowly, her hands trembling. Inside was a legal transfer document, the Sunrise Diner, deeded officially to her name. At the bottom was a handwritten note in Tony's script. "He trusted you with his mornings. I'm trusting you with his legacy. Tony Brooks." Mia pressed the letter to her chest. For years she'd fought for survival, scraping, saving, stretching every dollar. And now, she finally owned the place where her kindness had built a home. She whispered softly, as though speaking to Hector himself, "I'll take care of it, old man. I promise." That weekend, Mia's daughter, Amanda, joined her at the diner after school. Amanda was 12, bright, curious, and full of the artistic spark her mother once had before life demanded practicality. As Amanda watched the customers eat, she said, "Mom, you know what this place needs?" Mia smiled. "A new coffee machine that doesn't sound like a dying cow?" Amanda giggled. "No, a mural." Mia raised a brow. "A mural?" Amanda nodded excitedly. "Of Mr. Brooks. So people remember him. But not, like, fancy or serious. Something warm. Like he's smiling at everyone." Mia hesitated, her heart swelling with pride. "You think you can paint that?" "I want to try," Amanda said. "He was part of our family too, right?" Mia swallowed the lump in her throat and nodded. "Yeah, baby. He was." Over the next few weeks, Amanda worked after school, brushes, colors, laughter filling the diner in ways Mia hadn't heard in years. The wall near the window transformed slowly into art. A vivid mural of Hector Brooks, sitting at his favorite booth with a cup of coffee in hand. Above his head, in Amanda's neat cursive, were the words, "Kindness is the richest legacy." When it was finished, Mia stepped back, tears stinging her eyes. The whole diner clapped. Even Tony, standing quietly at the door, smiled, genuinely this time. "It's perfect," he said softly. Amanda turned shyly toward him. "You think he'd like it?" Tony's gaze lingered on the painted eyes of his father, gentle, wise, forever watching. "He'd love it." Then he turned to Mia. "He'd be proud of you too." She laughed lightly, brushing away a tear. "Don't make me cry in front of customers, Tony." "Let them see," he said, smiling. "Maybe it'll remind them that good people still exist." As weeks melted into months, Tony kept visiting, not out of obligation, but belonging. He'd sit at his father's booth, sometimes with a stack of paperwork, sometimes with nothing but thought. He ordered the same meal every time, black coffee, toast, and jam. It became his ritual now, his way of keeping the thread unbroken. One afternoon, Mia noticed something subtle. He no longer brought his phone to the table. No calls, no emails, no distractions. Just quiet. Just living. Once, as she refilled his cup, she said, "You're starting to look more like your father every day." He smiled faintly. "Then maybe I'm finally learning what he knew all along, that peace isn't earned through power." She tilted her head. "And what's it earned through?" Tony looked around the diner, the mural, the laughter, the hum of ordinary life. "People like you." She blushed, shaking her head. "I just do my job." He met her eyes. "You love your job. That's rarer than money." Later that evening, after closing, Mia stepped outside. The city lights flickered on, one by one, across the skyline. Tony was standing by his car, about to leave. "Hey," she called. "You heading back to your empire?" He smiled. "Nah. I'm heading home. It's smaller, but quieter." Mia nodded approvingly. "That's progress." He hesitated, then said, "You know, sometimes I think my father didn't really die here. He just passed the torch." Mia's eyes softened. "He didn't just pass it to you, Tony. He passed it to everyone who ever sat in that booth and learned something from him, including me." They stood there for a moment, the soft hum of the street blending with the faint smell of brewed coffee. Tony looked back at the diner one last time. He'd be proud of what this place became. Mia smiled, her voice almost a whisper. He already was. As Tony drove off into the dusk, the diner's neon sign buzzed to life, Sunrise Diner, glowing like a promise. Inside, Mia turned off the lights and glanced at the mural of Hector one last time before heading home. The painted smile seemed almost alive under the glow. Beside it, Amanda's words gleamed softly on the wall. "Kindness is the richest legacy." And that night, as the city pulsed beyond the windows, it was true, for the first time in generations, the Brooks name stood for something money couldn't buy. A full year had passed since Hector Brooks' funeral, a year that had reshaped lives, restored hearts, and rewritten the meaning of legacy. The skyline of the city shimmered under the early light, and at its center stood a tall glass tower with a new banner across its front. The Gold Project, a legacy for humanity. Camera crews buzzed. Reporters crowded around the marble steps. Inside, a press conference was minutes away from beginning. Tony Brooks adjusted his tie before the mirror. His reflection didn't show the cold, armored CEO he used to be, but a man humbled, matured, softened by truth. He still carried the sharp look of leadership, but there was something different in his eyes now: peace. A young journalist whispered to her colleague, "That's Tony Brooks, right? The billionaire who disappeared from the media for months." Her partner nodded. "Yeah. Word is, he's changed everything, new ethics, new company vision. Some say it's because of his dad. They didn't know the full story. They never would." Tony stepped up to the podium. The crowd quieted. Camera flashes slowed. He looked out at the sea of faces, executives, reporters, philanthropists, and began in a voice calm but steady. "Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here to witness the beginning of something that, for me, isn't just a project, it's a promise." He paused, letting the silence breathe before continuing. "A year ago, I thought legacy was about what we build, the towers, the companies, the numbers. But then I met someone who showed me that legacy isn't measured in what you own, but in who you touch." Whispers rippled through the audience. Cameras zoomed in closer. Tony's gaze drifted momentarily toward the back of the hall, where Mia Ramos stood quietly, wearing a simple white blouse and black slacks, her diner name tag still clipped to her pocket like a reminder of where she came from. He smiled faintly before turning back to the microphone. "This project, the Gold Project, was named after the man who taught me that lesson. My father, Hector Brooks. But the idea, the heart of it, came from someone else entirely." A pause. The room leaned in. "She's not an executive. Not an investor. She's a waitress at a small diner on the east side of town. She served my father breakfast every morning for years. And without realizing it, she gave him something that no boardroom, no fortune, no empire could ever give: peace." Murmurs broke out among the crowd. Tony continued, his tone firm, emotional but composed. "She gave him humanity when the world only cared about wealth. She reminded him that kindness isn't weakness, it's strength. And when I met her, I finally understood the man my father had become in his final days." He turned slightly toward where Mia stood, his voice softening. "She gave my father peace, and she gave me a reason to believe again." The applause came slowly at first, hesitant, respectful. Then it grew, rising into a standing ovation that filled the hall. Mia blinked rapidly, her throat tightening. She hadn't expected him to say her name, let alone tell their story to the world. But as the applause thundered, she smiled, not for herself, but for the old man who used to sit by her window every morning, scribbling quietly between sips of coffee. Later that evening, after the cameras had dimmed and the speeches had ended, Tony slipped out of the skyscraper unnoticed. No entourage. No headlines. Just him. The streets felt quieter than he remembered. Familiar. He turned a corner and saw the flickering neon glow of the Sunrise Diner, its sign still humming against the night. The words "kindness is the richest legacy" shimmered faintly beneath the light. Inside, the diner was half empty, just a few late-night customers finishing pie and coffee. Mia stood behind the counter, hair tied back, wiping down a table. She looked up as the door chimed. Her expression softened immediately. "You clean up nice," she teased gently. "Big day, huh?" Tony smiled, sliding into the corner booth. "You saw?" "Of course. We were streaming it right here during the lunch rush. You had the whole diner crying." He chuckled. "Guess I got that from Dad." Mia poured him a cup of coffee, the same way she used to for Hector. Black, 2 sugars. The cup clinked softly as she set it down. "On the house," she said with a wink. He took a sip, inhaling deeply. "Still perfect." For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The quiet hum of the diner filled the space between them. Tony looked out the window, at the reflection of the city skyline glowing faintly in the glass. Then he turned back to her. "Do you ever think about him?" Mia nodded slowly. "Every morning. I still set the booth before opening, old habits die hard." He smiled. "I think he'd like that." "I think he'd like what you did today even more," she said softly. Tony exhaled. "It's strange. For years, I thought I was building my father's dream. Turns out, I was chasing his shadow. You helped me see the difference." Mia tilted her head, her eyes gentle but strong. "He didn't leave you his shadow, Tony. He left you his heart. You just had to stop long enough to feel it." Her words lingered, wrapping the air in quiet truth. Tony looked down at his coffee, then back at her. "Better now that I'm here," he said. Mia froze for a second, her chest tightening at the familiar phrase. Then she smiled, her voice almost a whisper. "You sound just like him." "Maybe that's the point," Tony murmured. "Maybe we're supposed to keep echoing the people who loved us right." Outside, the first light of dawn began to bloom, washing the sky in soft gold. The city skyline shimmered against the rising sun, the same color as Hector's old pen, the one he used to write in his notebook every morning. In that moment, everything came full circle. The diner that had once been Hector's quiet escape was now a living legacy, bustling with laughter, murals, and stories. The son who once hid behind walls of wealth now understood the true cost of peace. And the woman who had once been just a waitress had become something greater, a keeper of kindness, a silent architect of redemption. Mia poured another cup, her smile calm and full. Tony looked up at her, his expression soft but certain. "You ever think about what's next?" he asked. She chuckled. "Breakfast, lunch, dinner, repeat." He laughed lightly. "You really don't change, do you? Not when the world keeps bringing me people who need coffee and second chances." He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "Then maybe that's what the world needs more of." As the day broke fully, light streamed through the diner windows, illuminating the mural of Hector Brooks on the wall. His painted smile caught the sunrise just right, glowing faintly, almost alive. Below it, the words shimmered in gold. "Kindness is the richest legacy." Tony glanced up at the mural one last time, his reflection blending with his father's painted face in the glass. Mia noticed, her heart swelling with quiet pride. It wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something new, something healed, something true. She walked to the counter, refilled a coffee pot, and called out over her shoulder, "Same time tomorrow, Mr. Brooks?" Tony looked up from his seat and smiled. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." The diner bell chimed softly as the morning crowd began to arrive, workers, mothers, students, strangers, all greeted by the warmth of a place built on kindness. The camera would pan out slowly through the diner window, capturing the quiet beauty of the city awakening. The skyline shimmered gold. The sun rose higher. And over the glow of the diner, Hector's voice, calm, wise, eternal, would echo like a whisper from another time. "You reminded me what humanity feels like." He came searching for a will, but found his father's heart still alive in the hands of a waitress. She only served him breakfast, but she fed him something far richer, faith, love, and a legacy money could never match. Backhand index pointing right. Subscribe to the Billionaires Enclave, where every story proves that the smallest kindness can rewrite destiny.